The Vorathi High Command had a saying, "Never let a human near anything important." It was stitched into military doctrine, whispered between officers in briefing rooms, and practically carved into the hull of every warship in the fleet. And yet, somehow, on the worst possible day in recorded Vorathi history, a single human cadet ended up being the only living soul standing between the most advanced warship ever constructed and a catastrophic, irreversible, spectacular failure. Oh, the irony was absolutely delicious, if anyone had been in a position to appreciate it. Vrak Solon, senior tactical officer aboard the ISV Calethorn, had lived through 47 combat engagements, 3 civil wars, and 1 particularly nasty divorce. He was not by any reasonable definition a being who panicked easily. His cranial ridges were deep and dark with age. His 4 eyes had seen the edges of known space. His hands, all 6 of them, had pulled comrades from burning wreckage more times than he cared to count. But standing in the shattered command bridge of the Calethorn, watching the ship's neural core bleed blue plasma from 17 different rupture points, Vrak Solon was panicking, quietly, internally, with great dignity, but panicking nonetheless. "Damage report," he said, keeping his voice perfectly level. "Sir," said Ensign Tuva Reth, her secondary eyelids flickering with barely contained terror. "The report is not good." Define not good. The neural core is fractured in 42 separate locations. The quantum lattice holding the ship's navigation memory together has collapsed. The backup drive is fused to the primary housing and cannot be extracted without a plasma cutter, which we no longer have. The life support is operating at 11%, and... She paused, as if weighing whether it was actually worth saying the final part. The weapons array has somehow managed to point itself directly at our own engine block. Vrak Solon stared at her. "The weapons are pointing at our engines." "Yes, sir. Our own weapons." "Correct, sir." He looked up at the ceiling. A long crack ran the full length of the command bridge, leaking pale orange atmosphere into the void. Somewhere deep in the ship, metal groaned like a wounded animal. The Calethorn, pride of the Vorathi fleet, a warship that had taken 3 generations and 200 years to design and build, was dying in real time. "And the repair crew?" he asked. Tuva Reth hesitated. That hesitation was, in hindsight, the loudest answer she could have given. 4 are dead, sir. 2 are unconscious. 1 is technically alive, but has locked himself in the emergency supply room and is not responding to communication. And the rest of the ship, 23 crew are functional. 41 are injured. And, another pause. And the exchange cadet, sir. The human, Cadet Mira Solano. She is uninjured and is currently standing in Corridor 7 asking if she can help. A silence fell over the bridge so complete that Vrak Solon could hear his own secondary heart beating a little too fast. "Absolutely not," he said. "Now, let us be clear about something. Mira Solano was not supposed to be on the Calethorn. She was supposed to be on the ISV Drasvan, a training vessel. A perfectly safe, perfectly boring ship that ran milk runs between 2 quiet star systems, and had not seen combat since before her grandmother was born. She had been transferred to the Calethorn 3 days ago due to what the fleet called administrative reassignment, and what Mira privately called someone losing her file and putting her on the wrong ship. She was 19 years old. She had graduated top of her class at the United Earth Defense Academy in Bogota. She had a minor in advanced propulsion theory, a passion for reconstructive engineering, and an extremely unfortunate habit of fixing things that she had not been asked to fix. She was standing in Corridor 7, watching the ship slowly fall apart around her. And she was not afraid. She was, if anything, mildly annoyed that no one would let her help. The intercom crackled. "Cadet Solano." Vrak Solon's voice came through, stiff and formal. "You are instructed to proceed to the emergency life pod bay and await evacuation." Mira looked at the intercom panel on the wall. Then she looked at the exposed conduit running along the corridor ceiling, which was leaking power into the ventilation system and causing a feedback loop that was, in her professional opinion, the reason the ship's life support was collapsing. It was not a complicated problem. It was, in fact, a deeply stupid problem. The kind of problem that happened when 2 systems were connected by someone who had clearly never read the cross-integration manual. She pulled out her multi-tool. "Copy that, sir," she said. And then she got to work. Vrak Solon did not know that Mira had not gone to the life pod bay. He was too busy trying to prevent the Calethorn from folding in on itself. The neural core situation was dire. Without a functioning neural core, the ship could not navigate, could not fire, could not communicate, and most critically could not stop the weapons array from building up enough charge to vaporize the engine block in approximately 40 minutes. Chief Engineer Dos Calvin, who was missing 2 of his fingers and had a burn across his chest that would scar badly, was standing over the core housing and shaking his head in the slow, rhythmic way of a being who has fully accepted that everything is terrible. "There is no fixing this," Das Calvin said. "There has to be a way, sir. The quantum lattice is shattered. The only way to rebuild it is to use a Selkari bonding matrix, which requires Selkari tools, Selkari materials, and approximately 40 years of Selkari training. We have none of these things." "Then what do we have?" Das Calvin looked around the engine room, at the sparking conduits, at the cracked housing, at the plasma still bleeding from 17 rupture points. "Optimism," he offered. From somewhere above them, through the cracked ceiling, there came a loud clang, then another. Then the sound of something being unscrewed with significant enthusiasm. Both officers looked up. Mira had found the first problem in 6 minutes. The exposed conduit in Corridor 7 was feeding static discharge into the ventilation manifold, which was in turn overloading the atmospheric processors. She bypassed it with a direct splice, rerouted the discharge through a grounding line she pulled from the emergency lighting system, and watched with quiet satisfaction as the life support reading climbed from 11% to 22%. The second problem took her 4 minutes. A fractured coolant pipe near the weapons array junction was causing a false pressure reading, which was why the weapons had pivoted inward. The targeting system thought it was compensating for an external pressure event. It was not. She sealed the fracture with a compression band from her kit and manually reset the targeting baseline from the secondary control panel in Maintenance Corridor 4. The weapons array stopped pointing at the engine block. She checked her watch. 10 minutes, total. She allowed herself a small smile. Then she climbed down through a maintenance hatch into the sub-level of the engineering deck where the neural core was housed, and found Vrak Solun and Das Calvin standing in the wreckage of 40 centuries of Vorathi engineering achievement, looking completely lost. They stared at her. She stared at the neural core. "What?" said Vrak Solun, in a voice that was trying to be commanding and mostly managing to be very tired. "Are you doing here, cadet?" "I fixed your life support," Mira said, "and your weapons array. You are welcome." She walked past him and crouched in front of the neural core housing. "This is the main problem." "Yes," said Das Calvin, slowly. "We are aware. The quantum lattice is shattered. Also aware. You are trying to repair it with Vorathi tools." "Yes." Mira tilted her head. "Why?" The 2 officers exchanged a look, the kind of look that carries a full conversation inside it. The conversation, translated loosely, went, "Did this human child just ask us why we are using our own tools on our own ship?" "I believe she did. Should we be offended?" "I genuinely do not know. Because," Das Calvin said carefully, "this is a Vorathi ship." "Right," Mira said, "but the quantum lattice is a Selkari-derived design. It was built using harmonic resonance bonding. Your tools work on electromagnetic principles. That is why every repair attempt you have made has made the fractures worse." Another silence. Longer this time. "How do you know this?" Vrak Solun asked. "I wrote my thesis on cross-species engineering compatibility," Mira said, already opening her kit. "Also, the design schematics are printed on the housing panel right there." She pointed. On the side of the neural core housing, in small but perfectly legible Selkari script, was a notation that translated roughly to, "Do not use electromagnetic tools, harmonic resonance only." Das Calvin turned very slowly and looked at the panel. He had been standing next to it for 2 hours. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say. Vrak Solun was a practical being. He had survived 47 combat engagements by knowing when to hold a position and when to let go of his pride and accept that someone else knew better. This was, genuinely, one of the hardest moments of his life. But the ship was dying, and this small, calm, slightly terrifying human was pulling tools out of her kit that he did not recognize, handling the fractured lattice with a precision that should not have been possible, and humming to herself like she was fixing a broken shelf in her quarters. "What are those tools?" he asked. "Resonance drivers," she said. "Standard kit for anyone working on hybrid tech repairs. We get a lot of Selkari derivative systems on Earth ships now. We have been cross-training since the Accord." "The Accord was signed 7 years ago." "Yes. You have only been an adult for what, 1 or 2 of those years?" "I started cross-training at 14, Mira said without looking up. "My uncle worked salvage. We pulled a lot of interesting ships out of the graveyard fields near Helix Station." She paused, aligning 2 fractured nodes with the resonance driver. A soft chime sounded as they locked. "I used to fix them for fun." Das Calvin made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "For fun," he repeated. "It is a good hobby," Mira said. Tuvareth's voice came over the intercom. cracked with static but audible. Sir, the weapons array has depressurized. The targeting system has reset. Life support is at 31% and climbing. Whatever is happening in engineering, please keep doing it. Vriksolan looked at the back of Mira's head, at the small, focused human who had walked into the worst engineering disaster in Vorathi naval history and started fixing it with tools from a kit that fit in a backpack. He thought about the doctrine, never let a human near anything important. He thought about how thoroughly and completely that doctrine had already failed today. He clasped 2 of his 6 hands behind his back, straightened his spine, watched. Mira reached into the fracture at the heart of the neural core housing and began to sing, softly, tunelessly, a low resonant hum that was less singing and more just, producing a frequency, matching the vibration of the Selkari lattice the way a key matches a lock. The fractured nodes began, slowly, to glow. Is she? Dos Calvin whispered, singing to the ship. Resonance activation requires a frequency anchor, Mira said, not pausing. The driver provides the base frequency. The vocal anchor helps calibrate the harmonic window. It sounds ridiculous, but it works. Where did you learn this? Helix Station Salvage Yard, Ship Graveyard, old Selkari cruiser. I was 16. The previous owner left a repair manual in the glove box. Vriksolan blinked all 4 of his eyes simultaneously. A glove box. Yes, of a 200-year-old warship. The Selkari are very organized, Mira said. Ah, there it is. The glow in the core housing intensified. The hum of the ship, which had been a ragged, dying stutter, began to smooth out. Like a heartbeat finding its rhythm, the overhead lights, which had been flickering weakly, steadied. The life support reading on the wall display jumped. 39%, 44, 51. The neural core sang back, and that was only the beginning. Because what Vriksolan did not yet know, what nobody on the Kael'thorn had yet realized, was that the crash had not been an accident. Someone had put the Kael'thorn in this position deliberately, and they were still out there, watching the ship, waiting to confirm the kill. The fact that a 19-year-old human with a backpack full of salvage tools had just brought the ship back from the edge of death was, for them, a very unpleasant surprise. There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a ship when it realizes it is being hunted. It is not the silence of emptiness. It is heavier than that. It is the silence of 43 crew members holding their breath at the same time, of consoles running diagnostics with the volume turned down, of officers looking at sensor readings and then looking at each other and not saying out loud what they are both thinking, because saying it out loud makes it real. And nobody on the Kael'thorn at that precise moment wanted it to be real, but real it was. Tuva Reth was the one who found it. She had been running a passive sensor sweep from the secondary bridge console, which was the only console with enough power to run a full-range scan, mostly because Mira had quietly rerouted 3 non-essential power lines to it while nobody was paying attention. The sweep came back clean on the first pass. On the second pass there was a ghost. On the third pass the ghost had moved. Sir, Tuva Reth said. Vriksolan was still in the engineering deck watching Mira work on the neural core, trying to decide whether he was more impressed or more unsettled. Report. We have a contact. Approximately 400,000 kilometers off the port bow. It is running a phase cloak. A phase cloak. Vriksolan's jaw tightened. Phase cloaks were not common technology. They were expensive, difficult to maintain, and only useful if you intended to sit very still in one place for a very long time watching something. They were, in short, the technology of patience, of ambush. Can you identify it? Partially. Tuva Reth's voice dropped. The hull signature matches a Drath-class disruptor vessel. Vorathi registered. The word landed in the engineering deck like a dropped weapon. Dos Calvin went very still. Even Mira, who had been humming quietly over the neural core, paused. Vorathi registered. Vriksolan repeated. Yes, sir. He stood there for a moment, processing that. A Vorathi ship, running a phase cloak, parked 400,000 kilometers away from a crash site that, until 20 minutes ago, had looked like a clean kill. Vorathi did not ambush Vorathi. That was not how things worked. That was not how things were supposed to work. And yet here was a Vorathi ship doing exactly that. And the only reason the Kael'thorn was still intact enough to detect it was because a teenage human from a salvage yard had fixed the sensors by rerouting 3 power lines while everyone else was busy panicking. Cadet Solano, he said. Mira looked up from the neural core. Her hands were still inside the housing, holding 2 resonance nodes in precise alignment. Yes, sir. How long until the core is fully functional? She tilted her head slightly, not breaking her hold on the nodes. Define fully functional, Navigation and communication maybe 8 minutes. Full tactical capability, 25. I would not push the weapons array beyond 40% charge until I have run a secondary calibration on the firing matrix, which takes another 10. We may not have 25 minutes. Then tell me what you need first and I will work backward from that. Vraxolin looked at her. At this human, wrist deep in the most sensitive component of a warship that had taken 2 centuries to build, treating it with the casual confidence of someone who had done this 100 times before, in a salvage yard, as a hobby, navigation and communication, he said. Now, 7 minutes, Mira said, and went back to humming. The Drath-class vessel outside was named the Sulcan Var. Its captain was a Vorathi officer named Groth Amol, and Groth Amol was, by any reasonable measure, not a good person. He was the kind of officer who had spent 30 years convincing himself that ambition was the same thing as principle, that loyalty was negotiable when the price was right, and that the Kalethorn and its crew were a sacrifice worth making for the political faction that had been paying him for the last 4 years. He was currently sitting in his command chair watching the Kalethorn's wreckage on his tactical display, waiting for the heat signature to go flat, waiting for confirmation. He had been waiting for longer than expected. Why? He said to his sensor officer. Is the Kalethorn's power signature increasing? His sensor officer, whose name was Pelvrask and who was deeply unhappy about his life choices that had led him to this assignment, looked at his display with the expression of someone delivering bad news to a very dangerous person. It appears the ship is repairing itself, sir. Ships do not repair themselves. This one appears to be making an exception, sir. Groth Amol leaned forward. On his display, the Kalethorn's power readings were climbing in a steady, deliberate pattern. Not the random spikes of a dying system. Not the last convulsions of overloaded circuits. A measured, controlled recovery. Someone was fixing the ship. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Drop the phase cloak, he said. Pelvrask blinked. Sir, if we drop the cloak, they will detect us. They already detected us, Groth Amol said, in the quiet voice of a man recalculating. Someone on that ship is smart enough to run a passive sweep through a broken sensor array, which means they are smart enough to find us whether we stay cloaked or not. Drop it, and charge the disruptors. The phase cloak peeled away from the Sulcan Var like smoke from a fire. On the Kalethorn, the moment the cloak dropped, every working alarm on the ship went off simultaneously. Tuvareth was already at the communications console. They are charging weapons, sir. Disruptor array, full power. I am estimating firing solution in 6 minutes. Vraxolin looked at the engineering deck ceiling. Cadet, I heard, Mira said without looking up. 5 minutes. I need 5 minutes. We have 6. Then I have a minute to spare. Stop talking to me. Doss Calvin made a sound that might under different circumstances have been a laugh. He pressed his remaining fingers against his chest wound and watched the human work. The neural core was beginning to sing properly now. Not the weak fractured vibration of a dying system, but something deeper, fuller, a sound that seemed to come from inside the walls of the ship itself. The Kalethorn was waking up, slowly, painfully, like a patient pulled back from the very edge of something final. The overhead lights stopped flickering. The deck plates steadied under their feet. The atmospheric processors hummed to full capacity and the air, which had been thin and cold and faintly metallic, began to feel like air again. Mira withdrew her hands from the core housing. She flexed her fingers once, checking them, then looked at the diagnostic panel. Navigation, green. Communication, green. Propulsion at 60%, and climbing. Tactical systems, amber. Weapons array, offline pending calibration. She stood up. Core is functional, she said. Navigation and communication are yours. Propulsion will hold for escape velocity if you need it. Weapons are offline. I am working on it. You said weapons would take 25 minutes, Vraxolin said. I said full tactical capability would take 25 minutes, Mira corrected. I said I would work backward from what you need first. She was already moving to the secondary panel on the far wall of the engineering deck, the one that interfaced directly with the weapons firing matrix. I do not need full tactical capability to get you one clean shot. I need 4 minutes. Vraxolin stared at her retreating back. 1 shot, he said. 1 very good shot, Mira said, pulling open the panel and getting to work. On the bridge, Tuvareth opened a communication channel to the Sulcan Var. It was not a polite communication. It was not a request for dialogue. It was a direct recorded transmission to the Vorathi High Command frequency, flagged Priority 1. Containing the full sensor log of the last 3 hours, the hull signature of the Sulcan Var, its phase cloak activation timestamp, its weapons charge status, and the name Groth Amol, transmitted on a channel that 17 different Varathi intelligence monitoring stations would receive simultaneously. Whether they survived the next 4 minutes or not, Grothamel's career was finished. His name was already being written into logs that could never be erased. Tuva Reth sat back from the console with a quiet, fierce satisfaction. "Communication sent," she reported. "Good," Vraxolun said. He was watching the timer in his head. 4 minutes. Mira had asked for 4 minutes. He was going to give her 4 minutes. In the Solkenvar, Pelvrask watched the outgoing transmission from the Kael'thorn and understood, with the clear and sudden certainty of a being seeing the shape of his future, that he needed to find a new line of work. "Sir," he said, "they have transmitted our identification data to High Command, on priority channels." Grothamel did not say anything. His jaw was doing the thing it did when he was very angry and very afraid at the same time, a rigid, controlled stillness that his crew had learned to interpret as a sign to stop existing in his peripheral vision. He looked at the Kael'thorn on his display, at the power readings still climbing, at the communications array lighting up like it had never been broken. "Fire," he said, "now. Do not wait for full charge. Fire." "Sir, at partial charge the disruptors will not penetrate the Kael'thorn's hull at this range. They will need another 90 seconds for full power." "Fire," Grothamel said again, and this time the word had no edges on it at all. The Solkenvar's disruptors released at 63% charge. The blast crossed 400,000 kilometers in just under 11 seconds. It struck the Kael'thorn along the port secondary hull with a sound like the universe clearing its throat. The ship rocked. Hard. Equipment crashed from wall brackets. 2 crew members in the corridor above the engineering deck went down, clinging to handholds. Tuva Reth's console sparked and went dark for 3 full seconds before the backup power routed through and brought it back. In the engineering deck, Mira grabbed the wall panel with both hands and held on, and did not let go of the firing matrix relay she had been recalibrating, and when the shaking stopped she looked at the relay, confirmed it was still correctly aligned, and went back to work. "That," she said, "was rude." "Status." Vraxolun barked. "Hull breach on port secondary, deck 9, Tuva Reth reported. "Emergency seals activated, no casualties, the core is holding." She paused. "They are charging for a second shot. How long?" 90 seconds to full charge. 2 minutes to firing solution at this range." "Cadet," Vraxolun said. 90 seconds, Mira said. "Give me 90 seconds. The next 90 seconds were the quietest 90 seconds in the history of the Kael'thorn. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved unnecessarily. The only sounds were the hum of the recovering ship, the distant creak of the emergency hull seals on deck 9, and the faint, precise sounds of Mira working on the firing matrix. Small metallic clicks and calibrations, deliberate and unhurried, like someone diffusing something that did not particularly frighten her. At 84 seconds, she closed the panel. "Weapons array is online," she said. "One shot. Do not push it past 50% charge or the calibration will drift and you will miss. At 50% at this range, you will hit." Vraxolun was already on the bridge channel. "Tuva Reth. Target the Solkenvar. Weapons at 50%. Fire on my mark." "Targeting," Tuva Reth said. A pause. "Locked. Fire." The Kael'thorn's weapons array, running at exactly 50%, struck the Solkenvar across its forward weapons housing with clean, precise, devastating accuracy. Not enough to destroy the ship, enough to crack the disruptor array into 3 pieces and vent the forward weapons bay into space. The Solkenvar went dark across its weapon system simultaneously, lights flickering, the charge it had been building for its second shot bleeding harmlessly into the void. Tuva Reth exhaled. A long, shaking, deeply relieved sound. Solkenvar weapons array is offline. They are venting atmosphere from decks 2 through 5. They are broadcasting emergency codes. Let them broadcast, Vraxolun said. Log the codes, add them to the transmission already sent to High Command, and tell the Solkenvar that they have our permission to sit exactly where they are until a High Command vessel arrives to collect them. Grothamel sat in his command chair and stared at the Kael'thorn, at the ship that should have been a dead hulk, at the power readings that said it was operating at 67% and climbing. He thought about the phase cloak he had used, the perfect ambush position, the 3 hours he had spent waiting for confirmation of a kill that never came. He thought about the transmission already spreading across 17 monitoring stations. He thought about the career he had spent 30 years building. He thought about the very specific chain of events that had somehow led to a Varathi warship crippled and crashing, being brought back to fighting capability in the time it had taken him to charge his disruptors. He did not yet know about Mira Solano. He did not know about the resonance drivers, the vocal frequency calibration, the salvage yard on Helix Station, or the repair manual found in a glove box. He did not know that the being who had undone him was 19 years old, human, had not been assigned to the Kalethorn at all, and had done the whole thing because she thought it was a good hobby. He would find out eventually. Everyone would find out eventually. That was the thing about the Kalethorn story. It traveled fast, the way the impossible things always do. Mira was sitting on the floor of the engineering deck, back against the wall, kit spread open beside her, running a post-repair diagnostic on her resonance drivers. They had taken some stress during the second calibration. She wanted to make sure they were still within tolerance before she packed them away. She was particular about her tools. Vroxolun came down from the bridge and stood in front of her. He looked at her for a long moment, at the small, unhurried human sitting on the floor of a warship she had helped save, checking her tools with the focused attention of a craftsperson after a long day. "Cadet Solano," he said. "Sir, you were ordered to proceed to the life pod bay." "Yes, sir." "You did not proceed to the life pod bay." "No, sir. Instead, you repaired the life support, neutralized a weapons targeting failure, restored the neural core, re-enabled navigation and communications, and calibrated a firing solution that neutralized a hostile vessel." "Yes, sir." A pause. "In approximately 30 minutes. Closer to 34, Mira said without looking up from her drivers. "The second calibration took longer than I wanted. The hit we took shifted the alignment slightly." Vroxolun was quiet for a moment. Then, in a tone that was trying to remain official and not quite managing it, he said, "Where did you learn to do any of this?" Mira looked up at him. She had the calm, clear eyes of someone who had never once doubted that a problem had a solution, who had spent her entire life looking at broken things and seeing what they needed. She smiled slightly, not a boastful smile, just a comfortable one. "Helix Station," she said. "Salvage yard. Ship graveyard." She clicked the resonance driver casing shut and tucked it back into her kit. "My uncle always said the best education you can get is to find something broken and figure out what it is asking you for." Vroxolun looked at her, at the neural core behind her, humming warm and full and alive, at the ship around them, battered and scarred but breathing, the hull seals holding, the power climbing, the Kalethorn refusing, with extraordinary stubbornness, to die. "Your uncle," he said, "sounds like a very wise being." "He is," Mira said. She zipped her kit shut and stood up. "Permission to inspect the hull breach on Deck 9, sir. I want to check the emergency seals before we attempt any kind of maneuver." He looked at her for one more moment, then he stepped aside and gestured toward the corridor. "Granted," Vroxolun said. And Mira Solano, cadet, human, occasional bane of military doctrine, walked down the corridor of the Kalethorn toward the next thing that needed fixing. Behind her, Dos Calvin looked at the neural core, then at the space where she had been standing, then at Vroxolun. "Sir," he said carefully, "I would like to formally request that she stays." Vroxolun watched the corridor where she had disappeared. Somewhere down the hall there was the sound of a hatch being opened, and then the precise, familiar sound of someone starting to work. "File the paperwork," he said.